once you have a few favorite ideas, you can start to build upon them and expand them into something that's going to resemble a song. And so that means we have moved on to the refining stage. I see the stage of refining as being the stage where you polish your ideas until they start to resemble the idea that you had in mind for them, okay? A lot of people think that they have to get into the weeds of music theory here when they are getting into refining their work. I get a lot of questions from people asking me, like, which theory principles should I use to define, to complete my work, for example, in order for their music to actually sound musical. But instead of dominating the conversation with music theory, which I don't actually think is that helpful, I kind of think that it's more helpful to think about songwriting using general principles of artistic design. In the previous slide, I was mentioning how, I borrow a bit from graphic design when I think about the process of creating. In my refining stages, I do too. I'm going to borrow principles that I learned from graphic design. The reason why I think that this is more helpful than simply using music theory is because graphic design is also an art form where you're trying to communicate something without necessarily using words. So I think that there's a lot of overlap here. I've collected design principles that I think are relevant to music, or I've adjusted them to music in order to help us know what to do with our ideas. Okay, so awesome, I'm glad you're on board. Okay, so now just before I start getting into those principles, I just want to make sure that you understand what you have to work with. So anything that you've created at this point is like, it's either a melody or a chord progression, something like this, right? Each of your melodies or chord progressions are going to have its own contours or characteristics that you can play around with, okay? The ones that I tend to settle on the most are pitch. So pitch is how high or low you're playing, like if your melody goes up or down, starts high, starts low. Timing, so whether your piece is slow or fast, or if you're playing short notes versus long notes. Dynamics is whether you're playing loudly or softly. Dynamics can also mean if you're increasing in volume versus decreasing in volume. And then shape. So the shape can be like the shape of each individual sound. Like if you're playing short notes or smooth legato notes, these have different shapes, okay? So shape can be referred to each individual sound or your melody as a whole. So like a melody that has only a very little bit of movement, like I think of like happy birthday, right? Happy birthday to you. There's not too much movement there. Happy birthday to you. Oh, there's a little bit more movement there. Oh, now this next part has a lot of movement. Happy birthday, dear. So that's kind of thinking about the overall shape of your sound. So with the principles that I'm about to show you, the strategies, we can use these strategies according to, we can apply them to the pitch, the time, the dynamics, and the shape of our music. I hope this makes more sense as I go through it. I'm going to give examples, okay, let's go. Are you ready to see the design principles that I've come up with? These are the design principles that I use the most and that I encourage people to think about when they are developing their own music. Design principles provide some structure to the elements that you're working with so that when your audience notices that you're using a pattern, like using one of these principles or maybe breaking the pattern, they recognize that you're trying to tell some kind of a story. Okay? We'll get into this in a second, but I also want to say that using design principles also helps us feel like we're doing more than just stringing together random melodies. it gives us a bit more purposefulness with how we string our melodies and how we develop our songs. So like we might come up with our ideas randomly, but how we use them is purposeful, and how we use them gets to be a point of pride. This is where we get the pride in our songwriting that I'm very excited about. Okay, so I have selected the principles that I find the most relevant to music. I will just read them to you and we will go through each one individually, okay? Balance. So the first three are the top three that I recommend first for beginners to songwriting. Balance, contrast, and repetition. Then if you're ready to move on to more intermediate ideas, we move on to movement, hierarchy, and emphasis. And then if you're an absolute master and you're ready to just kind of polish up your song, then we get into color, space, and unity, okay? So let's get into it.